Hello, thank you for joining my channel. In this inaugural video for my video series, I'm going to be talking about Jupiter and the synodic cycle of Jupiter and how I think it relates to the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm going to share my screen here. For those of you who don't have time to stick around for the whole thing, I'm going to start by giving my predictions, what I think is going to happen, and then I'll go into the astrological explanation of why I think those things are going to happen. Here we go. So in a few days, I'm recording this on August 15th. We're coming up to a point where I think it's going to hit kind of a breaking point or a culmination point where everybody is going to feel like, I just can't take this anymore. We've got to do something and we've got to do it big. People are going to lose their minds a bit. It's a full moon kind of lunacy idea. Whether or not the choices that people end up making are the correct ones, people are going to just feel like they've got to do something. And all of the stuff of the pandemic so far is coming to a sort of high point of energy. Early mid-October, I think we're going to see a sense of turning around. Something is, the numbers are going to start looking better. We're going to feel like, okay, this is actually going in the right direction finally. Mid-November, there's going to be some tension with related to the pandemic, kind of the sense of we've got to take what we have been through and figure out what we can really do with it. How can we make better policies going forward, or how do we clean up this mess? There's been all kinds of destruction that's happened through this pandemic, and what is the way forward here? At the end of the year, there is going to be this huge sense of relief, like, okay, it's going to feel like last May when they started lifting the mandates and people were saying, okay, we can go back to normal. But for real this time, I think we're going to see some of the wildest New Year's parties that we've seen in decades. People are going to just be like, hallelujah, let's put this behind us. I don't think it will be completely put behind us by the end of the year. There will still be processes going on to work on the issues of the pandemic. But by next spring, mid-March, we're going to really feel like we've hit the end of that chapter and we're on to a new story now. Okay, so why am I making these predictions? I'm basing this off of the synodic cycle of Jupiter. Now, obviously, life is very complicated. All of the planets are involved in everything. So I'm kind of oversimplifying this for the sake of this story. So what is a synodic cycle? Probably the easiest way to explain it is to compare it to the cycles of the moon, which we're all very familiar with. It starts with a new moon, it waxes to the full, and then it wanes back to the new, and it goes in this cycle. So anybody who's been around astrology for 5 minutes has probably heard explanations about the interpretations of the moon cycle. So the new moon is about new beginnings. It's about a birth, a kind of a seed that's planted, right? And then the full moon is the high point of that story that was started at the new moon. And then you see the energy kind of having to release, right? And so then it goes back down to the new moon. This is very obvious with the moon, but actually all of the planets have a cycle with the sun like the moon does. So this is an illustration of the orbit of one of the outer planets like Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, relating to the sun and the earth. So when the planet is farthest away from us and all the way across on the other side of the sun, to our perspective, it looks like they are joining together in the sky, and it looks like the sun kind of swallows up the other planet in its own light, and so the planet disappears. And the ancients felt that this was kind of like a death of the planet, or it's going to the underworld. It's disappearing into the hot burning rays of the sun, and the planet becomes purified, it becomes transformed, and it reemerges from the sun with a new story to tell, or a new kind of message to give, or issue that's going on related to the earth. And then it keeps traveling along, and eventually the planet gets to the far side opposite the sun, and that's similar to the full moon, but for the planet it's kind of like the full planet. It's brighter in the sky, and this represents kind of the halfway point of the story that started way back when, at the combustion to the sun. And then it continues on, and and it eventually returns back to the rays of the sun, and then we start a new chapter. Okay, so this is an oversimplification, but this is kind of what we're talking about when we say the synodic cycle. So with Jupiter, what's going on? We can compare again the Jupiter cycle to the moon. The conjunction is like the new moon. We have the opening square, which is kind of like the first quarter of the moon. Now with Jupiter, we have an interesting set of events that we don't have with the moon, which is that Jupiter stations retrograde, and it has a period of retrogradation from Earth's point of view halfway through this cycle. So it stations retrograde usually somewhere around the trine point with the sun. And then it moves to an opposition, or the sun moves to an opposition to Jupiter. And that's, like I mentioned, similar to the full moon. Jupiter ends up stationing direct. Again, we have kind of a closing trine with the sun, and then we have the closing square, and then it goes back, right? So in my opinion, these station points, these retrogradation, where it stations retrograde and stations direct, can be more powerful even than the squares, even though the aspect that they're making to the sun is usually a trine. Because the planet stops in the sky and hovers over this point for several days, and it looks like it's kind of just pushing on that button, just going to keep on making this point, and then it goes retrograde. That can be very that can indicate kind of an upheaval, or even perhaps more tension than you might expect with a square. So I'm going to kind of make that case with the COVID-19 pandemic situation. So why Jupiter? You know, isn't Jupiter supposed to be a benefic, right? Jupiter is the big Santa Claus in the sky. You know, he's about happiness and joy and luck. And why would I associate this wonderful, you know, benefic with such a terrible pandemic? The reason is because the last synodic cycle of Jupiter, the one that started in 2019, happened in Capricorn. You see all of these points in the cycle happen in Capricorn, which is a sign of Jupiter's fall. So Jupiter would like to bring blessings upon the earth, but in Capricorn, he doesn't have the resources to be able to extend those blessings. So instead, what we get is a dose of, you know, tough love, right? We've got to like deal with something that's very difficult to deal with. And I'm not going to go into the dates of the previous cycle in this video, but you can look at them and kind of get a sense of, oh, wow, there were actually turning points during those dates. And I was noticing that last year and kind of thinking, Jupiter has a role here in this pandemic. Now, I don't think that Jupiter, like I said before, all of the planets are involved in the, you know, everything. So I'm not saying that Jupiter is the only cause of the pandemic. In fact, what I would like to propose in this video, that Jupiter is more about our human response to the pandemic than the actual disease itself, which could be represented by other planets. I think that Jupiter, because it's about things like foreign travel or global realizations, higher education, like bigger learning, it's the great planet of high ideals, and the idea that, you know, we're all connected. I think that's the lesson that Jupiter is wanting to, one of the lessons Jupiter is wanting to impart through these cycles is, as a reaction, as a human global response, we are having to grapple with this idea that we are all connected, that something that happens on the other side of the world gets to us extremely quickly, and vice versa. And we are going to have to kind of absorb that idea of the connectedness of humanity. So, all right, let's look at this next cycle. So I mentioned the previous cycle, as we see December 28th, 2019, that was when they started noticing this virus, and then it, you know, started happening. And then we got a new chapter with Jupiter conjoining the sun January 29th, 2021. It was around that time when they said, hey, we've got this vaccine, it's available now, and we're going to be releasing it, and here we're making our plan for rolling it out, and etc. Then in May was the opening square, and Jupiter had just hit 0 degrees Pisces. Okay, so with this cycle, with this synodic cycle that started at the end of January of this year, Jupiter is in mixed conditions, right? So in the previous one, he was completely in Capricorn, completely in fall, didn't have the resources he needed. It was very depressing, very, very hopeless. But this cycle starts in Aquarius where Jupiter is peregrine. So he's still not in dignity. He still doesn't have the resources he needs. Peregrine is this idea of someone who's lost or in exile, or they still don't have the resources available to do what they need to do. But it's not the fall position. It's someone who's like, okay, I'm going to scrap together my resources. I'm going to make do. I'm going to figure this out. Hell or high water, I'm going to make this work even though I don't have what I would normally want, right? So it's about being resourceful, but still kind of feeling lost. Like I just don't feel at home. But part of the cycle, as you see, is in Pisces. And Pisces is the sign of Jupiter's domiciles. Jupiter is great in Pisces. He has all the resources he needs. He's got his hope, abundance, and joy back. But then he goes retrograde back into Aquarius for a while. So we have this mixed feeling this year. On one hand, there's a sense of like, I'm just so lost. I just don't even know how to make sense of this. And then there's also this sense of hope. So this is kind of the overarching story of the year. Okay, so we see the conjunction at 9 degrees Aquarius in January, the beginning of this year. Like I said, that was the vaccine. The opening square was mid-May. Jupiter enters Pisces, and then the sun perfects the square a week later. So this is kind of the point where like, oh, this is real. We're going to make this work. We're going the right direction. It's harder than we thought, but also we're going the right direction. But then we hit the retrogradation point in mid-June. And in the United States, people were going, wait a minute, why are people not getting vaccinated to the extent that we wanted? In the rest of the world, it was like, why don't we have the supplies of the vaccines that we need? And so Jupiter stops in the sky and starts going backwards, and people start losing their hope again. And then July 29th, Jupiter goes back into Aquarius, the sign of his exile, peregrine status. And it was like this, everybody's heart sank. Oh no, we've got the mandates back. We've got, we're closing down again. The numbers, the spikes are looking too high. The hospitals are filling up again. The collective sense of hope and joy just kind of went, oh no, now what? So that brings us to, like I said, I'm recording on August 15th. I'm now looking to the future. And in a few days, Jupiter is going to reach the opposition point to the sun, or I should say the sun reaches the opposition point to Jupiter, and it's going to be at 27 Aquarius and 27 Leo. And so this is a sense of, it's the halfway point, it's the culmination. The energy is very high. The story that we started back in January is now at its peak. And people are going to feel like, I can't take it anymore. Like something has to be done. And this is underlined in the astrology by the fact that we have a full moon just 2 days later, 2 degrees in the zodiac, which is just, all pretty much in the same place at the same time. So the full moon, we think of this idea of lunacy, right? People losing their minds around the full moon, going crazy. We're underlining this idea of, we have to do something, and I just can't sit here anymore and not do something. So I think people are gonna, unfortunately, I do think that there will be people who behave in bad ways and make bad decisions, and some rational and good decisions will come out of this too. Jupiter being peregrine is going to have to make do with what he's got. He's going to have to be clever. He's going to have to figure it out. But it's going to be kind of a tense point, right? Energies will be high. So what comes after that? Based on the decisions that we make in a few days, or it could even be that we're making now. I mean, these dates are not exact. It's, it's a season. I mean, Jupiter right now is already pretty much opposite the sun, just off by a few degrees, right? This is just the perfection point. But what comes after this? So Jupiter is going to station direct in mid-October at 22 degrees Aquarius. And I think what we're going to see then, oh, and by the way, Saturn stations direct just a week before. So we've got these two big planets who had both been retrograde stationing and starting to move forward again around the same time of the year. I think there's going to be this real sense of we've turned a corner, guys. Like, okay, finally the numbers are going the right direction. Finally, people have got their heads on straight. We've got this figured out. Like, damn, that was tough, but okay. So I think mid-October is going to be when people start to go, okay, maybe we can get through this. The closing square, so mid-November, at 23 degrees Aquarius, the sun makes a square from Scorpio. And at the same time, we also have another full moon underlining this point here, this time at in Taurus, and it's making a T square in the sky. So we've got the Taurus Scorpio full moon sun thing, and then it's squaring Jupiter and Aquarius. So I think we're going to have a sort of tense moment again there in mid-November, but it's going to be more about making a decision of how to close this thing down. Okay, let's reassess what we've learned. Let's figure out what went wrong, what went right. What kind of policy can we put into place, or set of policies? How do we act like adults now and set some things? I mean, these are all fixed signs. So, like, how do we put some things in place that will be solid and fixed, and to keep our society stable, right? The stability is going to be a theme here. It's going to be tough. It's going to be challenging, but things are going in the right direction now. And then, so this isn't part of the synodic cycle, but it's important because it's still Jupiter. He finally goes back into Pisces. Okay, after that retrogradation into Aquarius, coming back into Pisces, his home sign. Like I said, I think they're going to just be wild parties. It's going to be like reopening completely. I think people are going to feel this sense of freedom and relief, and like, that was terrible. Let's never do that again. Let's just go out and drink ourselves silly and like start over, right? So I do think that this New Year's is going to see some pretty wild parties, and people really celebrating that this is over. Now, it won't actually be over. I think we're still going to be hearing about COVID occasionally, this outbreak here, this outbreak there, or this event with vaccination, or something related to this whole theme of the pandemic occasionally, as people, we're having to kind of clean up the mess and so on. But I do think that by the close of the synodic cycle, which officially ends mid-March, which is also around the solstice point, it's going to feel like a new beginning. A new chapter will emerge in March of next year, and it will be in Pisces. That's for a different video and what that might look like, but that's what I think the rest of this pandemic is looking like. So hold on to your hats, hold on to your faith, whatever your spiritual practice is, if you have one. Make sure that you're holding on to it, because things are going to be, they're going to be tough for a little while longer. Do your best to stay safe, and then also do your best to stay connected to your spirituality, whatever that looks like for you, so that you can maintain a sense of hope and be that stability for people around you as well.